All right, good evening. My name is Felicia Penn. I'm going to call to order it's 5:31 technically, so we'll call to order the October 12th meeting of the Local Comprehensive Planning Committee. There are 8 seated members, and we have how many total members? So is this a quorum? Yes, it is. Thank you. I thought so, but I thought I'd double check. So I need to read this. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on Channel 18, and in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the committee must inquire whether anyone is taping this meeting and to please make their presence known. Nada. Okay. I don't see any hands going up. Thank you.
We're all eating.
All right, now we're up to 10. We're flying. I'm going to have the members introduce themselves, starting from my left.
Fran Parks,
Village.
Katuitt.
Thank you.
Jennifer Williams, Osterville.
Megan Moore, Marston's Mills.
Amanda Converse, Marston's Mills.
Wendy Northcross, West Barnstable.
Felicia Penn, Hyannis.
Avery Revere, Barnstable Village.
Cheryl Powell, Centerville.
Bob Twist, Osterville.
Lindsay Council, Centerville.
All righty. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes. I missed the link for these. Shame on me when they were sent out. And I looked online for draft stuff, and I didn't see them. So we're going to move this to our next meeting, if people don't mind. The minutes were from January 26th, which are kind of old, and June 22nd, which was our last meeting, I believe. I do want to get right into what we're doing this evening. So I'm going to call on Kate Maldonado to start Phase 2 introduction and overview, which is what we're here for. Kate, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Felicia. You stole my thunder. I was going to say, welcome to Phase 2 of the Local Comprehensive Plan. The structure for tonight's meeting, I will go through an introduction, an overview of Phase 2. Next, Rob Steen, Assistant Director of the Department of Public Works, will offer a presentation on our comprehensive wastewater management plan. We'll have an update on the LCP membership. We've put out for a few more members to fill this committee, and then we'll conclude with a discussion on a schedule for our meetings as well as next steps. As a quick recap, this committee was charged with steering an update of our local comprehensive plan, which is a long-term growth and vision policy that will guide the future of Barnstable over the next 10 to 20 years. This is a massive undertaking, and we have structured it to be organized by 2 phases. We've just finished Phase 2, and that concluded a existing conditions plan, which was a snapshot of where we are today with data and narrative. And that first phase also helped us through extensive community outreach and engagement to establish our vision statement for the vision, the future of Barnstable. Tonight, we kick off Phase 2. Under this phase, we will be tasked with developing land use, topic, location, and topic-specific community goals, as well as a strategic action plan that'll help us to achieve those goals expressed by our community. It's important that as we work through this second phase of this update to our local comprehensive plan, that we keep in mind that we continuously reflect on the work that was achieved under Phase 1, being the vision statement and our existing conditions plan as we work to develop goals through this second phase. Staff, we are proposing that this Phase 2 is structured to fall into 4 overarching, and you've got the materials before you in your binder, into 4 overarching topics. And those 4 topics will include specific chapters. The first topic will be land use and housing. Then we will review natural resources, facilities, and infrastructure, economic development, culture, heritage, and design. The objective is to work on one of the 4 topics at a time and proceed in this sequential order. Focusing on the first topic, the workflow plan that we're proposing to keep us on track for this effort. So each topic, we would start with an introduction presentation. During that presentation, we would bring in local and regional experts on the topic, the specific topic, as well as town officials to give an update and some insight on that topic itself, which we're commencing this evening. So after that introduction presentation, our consultant team, consistent with phase 2, so we're continuing to work with Barrett Planning Group, Dodson and Flinker, and Horsley Witten. So after that introduction, the consultant team would take the next month to draft that chapter, the goals, and the strategies to achieve those goals. Once a draft is achieved, we would regroup again, and as the committee, we would review that draft, talk about any suggestions, anything we want to dive into, any edits, and then at a subsequent and final meeting, we would finalize the draft. So working on one topic at a time, we would work through introduction to, at the end, producing a draft of that topic area, first starting with land use and housing. Once we've worked through each of these 4 categories, and we have drafts for each of them, then we would work on developing our action plan. So we'd take those goals that were defined in each of those topic areas and their specific chapters to develop our strategic action plan for how we're going to achieve those goals. And we also work on performance measures. So the performance measures will allow us to gauge or to track how we're achieving those goals over time. And as we've discussed in the past, when we need to step in and provide more resources to achieve some of the goals that are top priority. So this is the structure that we are proposing to work through this massive undertaking of phase 2. Each of those topic areas have the individual chapters. The chapters would be structured with a summary. That summary would include issues and needs for that specific chapter, such as tonight we're kicking off land use, so it'd be issues and needs for land use. Those issues and needs would be developed based on outreach that we did during phase 1, reflecting on our 2010 local comprehensive plan and continued community outreach. So the chapter would have issues and needs, goals, and then strategies for achieving those goals. We took each of those 4 topic areas and spelled them out. So again, that process being an introduction presentation, we'd review a draft, the consultant would draft that chapter, we'd review it and finalize it. So when you take each of those steps for the 4 overarching topics, and then we also consider the development of our action plan, and then once we have our action plan, the completing our actual comprising our local comprehensive plan, reviewing and finalizing that. We spelled that all out, all the timelines suggested for that, and we're looking at a targeted completion of April 2025. That being said, nothing is set in stone. We want this to be an adaptive process, but we wanted to take the time to lay out each of the steps that we would need to work through in order to develop the chapters for phase 2. To structure this, we're also started to think about community meetings. So we're suggesting after we work through the first 2 overarching topic areas, so land use and housing, and then our natural resources, facilities, and infrastructure. Once we finish those 2 topic areas, and we have our draft chapters going out to our villages to do village presentations, it's really important, just as we did with phase 1, to make sure that we're engaging our community, getting feedback from our community, and making sure that these chapters really do reflect the issues and needs of our community. So we'd get through the first 2 overarching topic areas, go out to the villages, present and get feedback. And then we'd work through the subsequent 3rd and the 4th topic areas, go back out to the villages. Then we'd work on our action plan once we have all of those chapters drafted. We're thinking about, at this point, once we've gone through the topic areas and the action plan, doing more of a town-wide meeting. I think we found great success in the past with holding one in-person meeting and then 1 Zoom meeting, just to allow variety of format and accessibility for members of the public. So once we had up to our action plan going out, and then once we've combined everything and have a draft of our local comprehensive plan, again, going back out to the community, maybe doing the townwide in person and then a Zoom version to present and get feedback. So certainly it's a huge undertaking. April 2025 is what we've established after laying out all the pieces that we need to achieve, but we do want your feedback and we do want this to be an adaptive process. So that concludes an introduction to the overarching phase 2. Tonight, we're going to start with land use. So I'm going to hand over the presentation to Assistant Director of Department of Public Works, Rob Steen, to first provide us the bulk of this presentation. Since we're starting a land use, will be a presentation on our comprehensive wastewater management plan. Through phase 1, we heard a lot of comments and concerns about water quantity, and so we wanted to commence this land use before we dive into issues and needs to talk about our comprehensive wastewater management plan. And then for our next meeting, continuing on land use, we are working with our consultant team, Horsley Witten, to develop an interactive mapping exercise. So we will use our 2010 land use maps as a starting point, and we'll have a robust dialogue on land use patterns, changes, and goals as we look to what we want the map to be, what our future should be for the town as we kick off our land use chapter.
Before we go to Rob, I'd just like to know if there's any questions or direct feedback to what you've just introduced to us from the committee members. Anybody? Fran?
I have a concern about, so the consultants are going to go through the chapters and look at them and make changes that they think that are appropriate? Is that what they're going to be doing, and then we get it?
If I may, so the process, let me go back. So the process would be that we open up a topic, and those topics in some cases have more than one chapter, and there'd be an introduction presentation. At that point, we'd have local and regional experts and town officials provide some insight. Then the consultants would take all that information from that introduction presentation, as well as all of the information that we've obtained through community outreach under phase 1, and they would take the next month to draft those chapters, and they'd bring those back before the committee for your review. And then we'd have a review, and then we'd have a subsequent meeting to finalize it.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions, comments? Nope, we're good? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Turn down the lights. This is washing everything out.
All right, well, Kelly is bringing it up. I will do some introductions. So, good evening. Hey, my name is Rob Steen. I'm with the Department of Public Works. I'm joined by Kelly Colopy, who's also with us. And we're here to talk to you about the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan. So, as Bob can tell you, this presentation, when we did it for Planning Board, went on for over 2 hours. I'm assuming you don't want a 2-hour presentation, but I don't know that for a fact. So what I'm here to say is that
We do have food, though, so we're more prepared than the planning
when
board
I
was.
saw food, I'm good to go. I mean, I can go all night. But we can task tailor this. So I don't know what you as an audience have for background with the CWMP. And so I don't want to be telling you things you already know. You know, Lindsay helped create it. Bob has sat through this once. I don't want to tell you stuff you already know. At the same point in time, if you feel like you kind of want the full soup to nuts, let's go back to the beginning and sort of talk our way through it. I'm happy to do that as well. So, you know, I guess the message is we're here to support you in whichever way we can, and can sort of we can sort of shift this thing to whatever you need it to be. If you're all well-versed and want to just ask specific questions, I'm happy to do it that way. We're happy to do a presentation. Kelly can talk to you about our outreach programs. So what was it, what's the feeling of the committee? What would be most beneficial for the committee?
Well, I'm thinking we should start at the executive summary level, and then when there are questions, et cetera, we'll work into those categories and you can respond. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And make sure you cover all aspects of it.
Okay. Before we go here, Kelly, can you go back to the presentation Kate just gave? And let's just start with that slide right there. So let me pick up where she left off. So the CWMP, for those of you sort of at the executive summary level, assuming that you have some basic understanding, comprehensive wastewater management plan is the plan that was devised with help from the RAC, which Lindsay chaired, to come up with how we're going to deal with nutrients in our embayments at the 50,000 foot level. And again, I can go back through the details and all that. But what interested me about this slide as I was watching that presentation is that it basically ties into the first three of these in a significant way. It may tie into the last one. I'm just not smart enough to know it. But certainly land use and housing, the CWMP is based on modeling done by the Massachusetts Estuary Program, MEP. MEP modeling is strictly a land use model. It takes a look at land use and makes predictions into what's going to happen in a water body based on what's happening on land. Natural resources, facilities, and infrastructure, the result of the CWMP are going to be infrastructure changes, and we're currently doing them, and it's to protect natural resources. Economic development, one of the aspects of CWMPs, and there's a number of reasons you create them, one of them is purely for economic development. That's not the case in ours, though we did take a peek at that and certainly had conversations with planning and development about it when we went through it. And I'd point you towards the Willow Street projects and things of that nature, which were brought into the plan not because of nutrients necessarily, but because of economic development and the need for economic development there and needing infrastructure to support that. So I guess my bigger point is that though this is the land use and housing discussion tonight, I would argue the CWMP could tie into any one of those first three topics. And frankly, as you get into those, if you want a refresh at some point in time or want to continue the conversation we start tonight in any one of those, we're happy to come back and do that. I don't think this is purely just a, one shot, we're done, we, part of checking the box and we're out of here. So that is sort of that. Kelly, if you want to sort of zip back to the other presentation, and I'm going to fly through this thing.
Felicia, just a heads up, I have to head out right around 6:30, 6:45, so I apologize in advance. It's not a lack of interest or that I can't be here, but
I'm devastated.
Work
I'm
itself.
crushed.
Thank you for the notification.
What? I mean, you don't find wastewater the most interesting thing you've ever heard?
It's close compared to my cardiac floor, but
Okay, I don't know. All right, so let's just start there and kind of work our way through. You can skip that. Wastewater issues. This is sort of the list of the general problems you're trying to go after when you're doing wastewater issues. Kind of what we just talked about, you'll notice economic development's in here. Ground land use is really kind of tied into that groundwater monitoring and impaired embayments. You can see how the natural resources are tied into here. All of this kind of combines together and creates a general problem that the town, 2015, 14, started to address with the RAC. Slide. Water Resources Advisory Committee, chaired by Lindsay Council. The bigger problem that we all hear about most often is nitrogen. What we call it the 208 problem. Nitrogen has a significant impact on our embayments. It's the limiting nutrient and saltwater embayments, and so thus can affect it. And I have a slide, 2 slides from now that will show you how that happens. But effectively, if you look at the box to the right, the top left square is sort of a healthy embayment, and what you'll notice there is that it has eelgrass. And eelgrass is generally, in our situation, considered the canary in the mine shaft. The bottom right, where you've got a very high nitrogen level, you don't see that. So as you start to introduce nitrogen at higher levels, you start to have eutrophication and problems within those embayments. And the origins of the nitrogen are here. Next slide, please. And also represented here. These all come out of the 208 plan. The 2 circles that you're seeing, or 2 pie charts that you're seeing, are showing you the different contributing sources of nitrogen on Cape Cod. The difference between the 2 is the circle on the left is non-controllable nitrogen, i.e. it includes atmospheric deposition, which we can't deal with. The circle on the right is all the controllable nitrogen. And what that really means is that the septic system component goes from being about 65% to about being 80% of the problem. So there was no way we were going to address nitrogen in our embayments without addressing septic systems on Cape Cod. And by the way, feel free to ask questions at any point in time throughout this. This is not a I talk at you and then you can ask questions at the end. This is we're having a conversation thing. So we're already flipping through this, but basically if you have healthy levels of nutrients, algae growth is limited, sunlight can penetrate clear water, submerged aquatic grasses uses the sunlight to make food. They provide habitat for the organisms that live there, they produce oxygen, the system is in balance, life is good, things are happy. Next slide, please. If you have excess level of nutrients, however, the algae will use that excess level of nutrient, nitrogen in this case, in saltwater embayments, and because it's the only limiting factor to their growth that's there, they'll explode. They will cloud the water, block the sunlight. Click. When they die and fall to the bottom, bacteria will feed on that algae. In doing so, it will consume lots of DO, and the DO level of the water body will drop tremendously. You will lose your grass habitat, so you're no longer creating oxygen in addition to that. And then at that point in time, any organism that can leave does so, and those that can't perish. Slide. So given that situation, the state came up with, and we mentioned this briefly already, the Massachusetts Estuaries Program, MEP. That was looking at a number of estuaries in southeastern Massachusetts. UMass Dartmouth was the enabler of that by doing the modeling, that land use modeling that we talked about earlier. As you may remember, very early in this process, back prior to 2010, there was a lot of discussion about, was that model a valid way to understand what's going on in the estuaries? And so the county did a peer review of it. And in fact, it was in this room. I remember watching the final presentation in 2010 in this room on that, where they came through and a number of knowledgeable, known people came through and said, yeah, look, this is probably the best way to go about in doing this. So this is really the tool of use is the MEP model. It is used once they go through and run it for DEP to create something called TMDLs, total maximum daily loads. These are effectively a pollutant budget for that estuary, for that issue. So if you look at our estuaries, and we will in a second, you'll see that there's TMDL limits on each one of those estuaries, thus pollutant limits on each one of those estuaries that we as a community have to find a way to deal with. As we talked about, eelgrass is the sentinel species, and then we're going to start having a conversation about watersheds. Slide. So I went through a presentation when I first started the Traveling Road Show, I don't know, back, Lindsay, when we were doing this. I went through an entire presentation one time, and I got to the end, and I was feeling really good about it because there hadn't been a lot of questions, and I was like, man, I nailed this thing. This was awesome. And somebody walked up and said, you know, that was really good. I understood everything, but what's a watershed? And I was like, all right, we're dead. So this slide came to be right after that. If you already know what watersheds are, I apologize for repeating that. If you don't, this is the point in time where I get to answer that question, so you don't come up to me afterwards and go, what's a watershed? The watersheds are the way scientists, for lack of a better term, are sort of talking about water's flow. So if you have a watershed, and you'll see them here on Cape Cod, any drop of water that falls in the watershed, and that yellow outline is the watershed, will theoretically go to the outlet of that watershed, which is the water body at the base of it. If it's on the other side of the line, it goes the other way, or to the other watershed. It's a pretty important point because the way the modeling works and the way the plans are built, not just ours, but all of them, is on a watershed by watershed basis. That's created a little bit of friction because our towns are based on geographic political boundaries. Plans tend to be built on watershed boundaries. Actually, the recent version of the 208's done a pretty good job sort of picking our way through that thicket. But that be as it may. Slide, please. So if you look at our watersheds, this is Barnstable, the non-grade portion in the middle. We have a number of watersheds on the south shore or the south side that are impaired. The Barnstable Harbor watershed, short of that little sliver you see with a 65 in it, is not impaired. It has assimilative capacity still within the harbor. We didn't need to deal with nitrogen there. On the south side, what modeling was predicting are these numbers. And what these numbers represent is the amount of existing nitrogen that needs to come out of these watersheds. So for instance, in the Three Bays area, we needed to remove 60% of the existing nitrogen there. Now, what's not said in that is that anytime I have to remove any percentage of the existing nitrogen, that is 100% of all future nitrogen, because at this point in time, it's assuming no future nitrogen is going in when it's figuring the 60% is coming out. So not only did we need to, in Three Bays, remove 60% of existing nitrogen, 100% future nitrogen. If you go across the line, Centerville River, we needed to move 34%. That little, I guess it's orange. The orange section has a similar capacity, which is why you see a plus in front of it. And then Lewis Bay was 23%. How the model actually works is not purely on a watershed by watershed basis, but it's on a sub-watershed basis. And so this is one of the model runs that was done. And what this tells you is that even though all of Three Bays, I need to remove 65% on average across the Three Bays watershed, there are sub-watersheds that in order to achieve that, the model is predicting we need to move 100% of the nitrogen, of existing nitrogen. There is only one way I know of to remove 100% of the existing nitrogen, and that is to take it out of there. You intercept the wastewater with sewers and you remove it from the watershed. Which is why, as you see how the plan evolved, that became a primary focus in many ways of many aspects of this. We looked at a number of other options, and we'll talk about them as we go on. But at the end of the day, it became pretty obvious that there was going to have to be at least some significant portion of this plan that involved sewering. Now, in addition to nitrogen, there's other options, there's other issues that you look at for wastewater, and we did too as the RAC. Those of you that are familiar with ponds know that though nitrogen is the limiting nutrient in saltwater bodies, phosphorus is the limiting nutrients in freshwater bodies and in ponds. So phosphorus is an issue. Contaminants of emerging concern, some of those are listed here. And then I think we've all heard recently about PFOS and PFOA, which frankly, when the RAC was first meeting, was just starting to come on the scene. We just had gotten hit with it for the first time, and we're just throwing GAC systems on the water treatment in Hyannis. And then from there, it's become a bigger issue, and we'll talk about that more later on, and we might get into it with questions. The fundamental question that the CWMP had to answer was this one, if you try to really boil it down to the essence of it. On which properties is a traditional Title V on-site wastewater system an adequate means of providing for the town's sanitation and environmental protection? And on which properties is it not? And it really came down to that. So first thing we did, much like you guys went through your phase one and sort of came up with existing conditions and things, we came up with our needs initially with our first phase. We then started looking at, all right, what's the breadth of solutions that are out there in this world? They range from a number of broad categories. So there's traditional solutions. We already alluded to that a little bit with sewering. That's basically centralized treatment in plants. There's non-traditional solutions that are out there. Dredging, aquaculture, permeable reactive barriers, fertigation, alternative toilets. I can go on. Advanced IA systems, et cetera. And then there's sort of management solutions. You know, the management side is if the town wants to regulate, and when we were talking to the planning board, this was probably more applicable and apropos, you know, does the town want to regulate growth? Does the town want to regulate future flow? Does the town want to regulate existing flow? And then things like fertilizer management and stuff. Fertilizer management is a small portion of this, so it's never going to be a case where we're going to be able to not fertilize our way out of this. But there's certainly an aspect of it to that. So traditional wastewater, how does it work? And again, if this is all stuff you get, yes, ma'am, go ahead. Sure.
What is fertigation?
We're going to get to that. Okay. Planning board asked me the same exact question. Everyone loves fertigation for some reason. And what I realized is I answered it at this point for planning board, then I realized that there's a slide, like 5 slides later, that actually show you what it is. So I apologize. I will get to it. If I don't, come back to me, Susan. Okay. So traditional wastewater, you basically have a neighborhood area that outlined at the top of the page is meant to represent a neighborhood area with a number of streets and homes. You have sewers there. You collect the wastewater from those sewers via gravity or pump stations that is conveyed to a water treatment facility or a wastewater treatment facility, depending on what you want to call it. There it is treated. From there, it is disposed of in any number of ways. In our town, it's disposed of to the groundwater. Pretty much everywhere in Cape Cod, it's disposed of to the groundwater. If you go off Cape, there is other opportunities with outfall pipes or other things of that nature, but we don't have those here at this point. So that's sort of the general look at what traditional wastewater does, or how it works. When we started having conversations with this, another question that would come up was we would talk about sewers as if they were a known entity, and we were finding that people didn't understand necessarily what a sewer was and what it did. So I'm going to take a minute on this unless you guys all look at me and go, dude, we know this. Not hearing that? All right. So what a sewer is you're effectively putting into the street a pipe. You're utilizing gravity, and sort of the trick of our trade is to use gravity wherever we can. Gravity doesn't take energy. Well, potential energy, but it's already there. So we're taking wastewater from the homes. It runs out to the sewer, and it runs downhill by gravity as far as it can go. Well, at some point in time, unless we're very lucky, and the entire town's built much higher than the wastewater plant, it runs out of gravity, and it comes to a low point. Well, at that point in time, we put in something called a pump station. What a pump station is a big tank of various sizes, depending on what you're going to be using it for. There's pumps either in the sewage or up above that are pumping from the sewage that then take that gravity-flowed wastewater that has flowed to it and pump it back up to the top of the next hill, so to speak, where it can then run by gravity again down and so forth and so on. So that's kind of how our sewer system works. Does that make sense to everybody? Is there any questions on that? Yes, ma'am.
How long does a sewer system last?
So traditionally, as a design point, we usually think of the piping as a 50-year investment, and we usually think of the pump stations as a 20-year investment. Now, I will tell you, I've run into piping much older than 50 years, and I've run into pump stations much older than 20 years. But the way you sort of do it from a planning perspective and from a budgetary perspective is on a 20-year increment on sort of mechanical things. Same thing with the wastewater plant. You know, the tanks will last longer than that, but the actual guts and the pumps and things, it's about a 20-year design life. So after we go through our sewer system and we go up and down, up and down, up and down, we end up at our wastewater, our water pollution control facility. This is ours. I can walk you through the processes. I don't know if you want to do that here. Effectively, what's going to happen is it's going to come in the front door. It's going to get some basic level of screening to take out big chunks, so to speak. One of the interesting things when I was a young engineer, I was working in a community where there was a jail, and we installed a new step screen, and I had to go into the headworks facility and was sort of watching it. And I was talking to one of the operators, and he said, you know, I love working in a community with a jail because they're getting shivs, they've gotten guns, they've gotten rolls of money, all that stuff gets screened out right there. Sometimes in complete entire bed sheets. It's like, how did that get in there? Who flushed that? But that's where it gets. So the big pieces like that will get taken out there. It then usually goes to primary clarification, where it will settle out anything that can settle. From there, it will go into aeration basins, where a process we'll talk about in a minute will start to happen. And there's a biota that's in there that will consume the BOD or the food, the organic carbon. After that, there's another set of settling basins to take out that biota, to take out all those bacteria and recycle them back to the aeration basin. And then from there, it's disinfected, and then it goes to the ground. So that's our current plant. I will tell you, we are in the process of doing an upgrade on this plant, right in the middle of the design on it, that will take this from a 1990s technology to probably a 2026 technology. And I use 2 years in advance, 3 years in advance on purpose. We're gonna, yeah. So that's kind of what's going on. Slide. Inverse farming. So when I first started doing wastewater talks many years ago, I was doing them mostly in Maine, and was trying to explain what wastewater treatment was. Maine has a lot of farmers, so they kind of understood this analogy. I apologize if it doesn't work here, but that's what I know, so that's what I'm going to do. So wastewater treatment and what goes on in that aeration tank I talked about where the biota is what I call inverse farming. So, and what I mean by that is if you look at traditional farming, in traditional farming, I as the farmer or you as the farmer, you're bringing food to an animal, potentially, because you want something from that animal. You want milk, you want eggs, you want them to pull a cart, you want meat, you want something from the animal. The whole point of this process is the animal. Wastewater puts that on its head. We're bringing food to animals because we want to get rid of the food. We don't really care about the animals. We don't want them. In fact, at the end, we throw them away. But what we are doing is we're using an ecosystem that we create in our aeration basin and that we support with aeration to consume all the organic carbon that's coming from all of us as individuals through that sewer system I talked about to the wastewater plant. And then all that biota that's in there is going to consume all that organic carbon and chew all that up. If we start staging how we do the aeration, we then can get into denitrification and other things, and we'll talk about that in a second. So that's really sort of wastewater treatment in a very broad nutshell. Does that make sense to people? Okay, next slide. So now we get into how we deal with nitrogen. So nitrogen comes from us, principally as urea, but in other forms. Usually converts to ammonia nitrogen pretty quickly after it comes out of the house. When we get it, we'll add oxygen to it. That's going to convert it to nitrite. After that, we'll continue to let it sit, and it'll convert to nitrate. And then, if we take nitrate and put it into a low oxygen area, all those bacteria that are in there that want oxygen as their terminal electron acceptor, what they're going to do is they're going to take that nitrate, and they're going to see those three oxygens on the backside of that thing, and they're going to say, we want that. So they're going to cleave off those oxygens, and that nitrogen escapes as nitrogen gas. So that's the biological process. Now, whether you're talking about an IA system, whether you're talking about PRBs, whether you're talking about our plant, however you're doing it biologically, it's principally this way. You're taking ammonia nitrogen after it's come out of us with some oxygen. You're making nitrite, you're making nitrate. You're then putting it into a low oxygen area where the bacteria will cleave off those oxygens, use it for them to consume food, and then the nitrogen will depart as gas. That's how that works. In the upgrade that we're about to undertake with the plant, our current plant currently is licensed to have an effluent of 10 milligrams per liter total nitrogen. We actually achieve 6. With our new plant, we are going to get down to probably 3 or a little less, which is generally state of the art. So we will be leveraging this with a four-stage Barnstable system at the very front end of the plant to leverage this to the fullest degree. Slide. Non-traditional solutions. So we talked a lot about the traditional solutions. Let's talk about the non-traditional solution. And Susan, this is your slide. Top right corner, fertigation. So what fertigation is saying, look, I've got nitrogen-rich water in the groundwater. It's a problem in the estuaries. I also have potentially big green spaces and fields that need nitrogen to be fed. Now, I can put artificial fertilizer on that and compound the problems I have with nitrogen. Or, alternatively, I can pump the nitrogen-rich groundwater out of the ground, spread it on top of those fields and those green spaces. The grasses and things that are there will consume said nitrogen. We will then mow it and be rid of that. And I've removed some nitrogen in the process. That's fertigation. Does that answer your question? Okay. Other things you'll see on this slide, the top left is a permeable reactive barrier. This was really a popular discussion pretty much at the 2010, 11, 12 timeframe. What you're effectively doing is you're intercepting nitrogen-rich groundwater with a trench that is full of an organic carbon source. Lots of times it's wood chips, it could be compost, some people are using organic oils, etc. But basically it's an organic carbon source and a buffering agent. And it's by definition of being buried a low oxygen area. So if I have nitrogen-rich groundwater that's been sort of mixing and moving it through, and I intercept an organic carbon source in a low oxygen area, per the slide I just showed you 2 times ago, what's going to happen? You're going to cleave off those oxygens, and nitrogen is going to escape as gas. That's how PRBs work. In theory, they work great. The problem is you've got to be able to intercept the groundwater, and if it happens to be really deep down, it's hard to get there. And groundwater's got a way of going around things it doesn't want to deal with. I mean, it's going to take the path of least resistance. So there's some practical and applicable issues that come with it, but the science and the thinking behind it and the right applications is not wrong. George is in the middle there representing sort of enhanced septic systems, and that's because he used to run, when I first built this slide, he was running the test center at that side. That's now being run by Brian, but they bring new septic systems in, they test them, they're looking for better ways to do this. That is ongoing. The Barnstable Clean Water Coalition is doing a lot of really good work on that right now in Marston's Mills, and it's something worth following in that sense. But we're not there yet, and we can talk about that in a minute if you want to get to that in questions. Bottom left is dredging. The theory there is that if you can open up flushing, the solution to pollution is dilution. If you can flush more, then you get things carried away. You maybe not have an issue. Urine diverting toilets. These were a favorite of mine for a while. It was initially theorized that 90% of the nitrogen coming out of a household is coming in the form of urine. Falmouth chased this hard at one point in time, having homes install urine diverting toilets where you're separating the urine from the solids. I remember being in conversations with people back when this was really sort of a hotter topic, and there was a person that was really unhappy about it, and it's like, sir, here's the reality. The difference is you just got to sit to pee. I mean, that's it. This will work for you otherwise. Unfortunately, what we found is when Falmouth started really working with it, what they were finding is it was not really 90%, it was more like 50%. And so it made the investment not necessarily as good as other things, and so it's fallen by the wayside a little bit. However, for new construction, it's certainly a consideration. And frankly, where this is, in my mind, most applicable is every boys' room in the world. Because those of my gender know that when you go into a public restroom, there's usually a stand-up place and there's a sit-down place, and all those stand-up places you can separate pretty easily because you're already doing it. But again, new construction tends to be more facilitating of that because the piping can be put in and all that kind of stuff. On the far right is aquaculture. Using filter feeders to clean the water. They will do that. You then have to remove the filter feeders from the watershed, otherwise you're just going to recycle it there. But that will work as well, and we have looked at that, and we have a project that we hope to get involved with that in the near future. Slide, please. Management solutions, we touched on it briefly. Zoning, fertilizer or water use regulations, things of that nature are all kind of in that bucket. Okay, the plan. I'm going to give you a couple real brief summary slides, and then I'm going to pass this to Kelly, who's going to walk you through our website. One of the things we want to do with this is talk about the plan, but also talk about what's on our website and the resources that are there, so that if at some point in time in the future questions come up, you know that's there for you and you can utilize, and you know what's there and how to get at it. So the plan evolved as this. It evolves as a 3-phase, 10 years each phase, 30-year plan. Lindsay and I were talking at the beginning of this. We initially started it as a 60-year plan with 3 20-year bonding periods. When we started our first round of traveling road shows, the feedback that came back was it's too long. We want a shorter plan, and the shortest we felt we could do was 30 years, so it got cut to 30 years. It will be tight, but we think we can do it. Key takeaways here. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Who thought it was too long?
I won't give you individual names, but at the end of the day, the town council president came into the room with us basically and said, you will cut it. And we said, okay. And at the time, what was happening is, and that sounds more draconian than it should, there was a really good dynamic going on at the time where the CWMP technical team was meeting with town council president, vice president, town manager, legal, I think finance was sitting in there once a week to really nuts and bolts the plan. He was at the time getting lots of feedback from community, and that was his role, is to bring the political feedback into the process and said, we can't live with 60 years. You're going to have to cut it. And 30 is as tight as we could get. Does that answer your question, Wendy?
I have a follow-up
Yes.
while you're at it. So it's election season again, and a lot of people are out there knocking on doors and getting feedback from people. And there are people in certain areas, like in the Woquacket Lake area, for example, who are, the question that a lot of them have that I've heard from people in that area is not so much as the years, although they are frustrated with that because they feel like, I guess, they're getting pushed to the back of the line. But their question was, why don't we hire somebody to do this build-out for us rather than the town doing it ourselves, because it'll be quicker? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody
yeah,
does
I
this.
do.
Is it money?
Yeah, so there's a couple different pieces there. So we did a study on that back when the plan came out in terms of how we're going to execute this plan. We sat down and looked at a couple different models. One model was the traditional, what most communities do, which is you bring in consultants and have them do this for you. Now, we didn't use that model for the CWMP purposefully. We did the CWMP ourselves in-house. The second model was we try to take on as much as we can in-house and manage the system that way. When we looked at the numbers for that, and I can dig that study up again if someone's interested, there was a significant cost savings to doing it in-house versus going out-of-house. Additionally, what we have found since then is that out-of-house is in no better position than we are in terms of hiring right now. They are equally as troubled. And what we have found is that we are having, on the projects that are out-of-house projects, Vineyard Wind being one of them, we're having to sit on those projects almost more than our in-house projects. And we're actually having to invest more time into those in our in-house projects because what the consultants are producing is crap. Excuse my French. And so we're lucky in the sense that we have PEs on staff that have done this. I've done this for a living. Britt Griffin's done this. Others of us have done this as consultants and can see that and say, this is garbage. An example, 2 weeks ago, Miro, one of my lead designers, was in a meeting with a consultant and basically had to redesign an entire sewer system for him. Like, dudes, you guys are 20-something feet deep. You don't need to be. You can be here. Look. Oh, yeah, that would work. Yeah, thank you. So there's no panacea to the consultant approach on two fronts. A, it's not faster because they're just as slammed as we are. And B, I would argue you're not going to get the savings on the staff side because we still need to invest a ton of people into riding herd on them, or you're going to end up with a less good product. So that's why that decision got made that way. We socialized that. It went around. The council made a decision on it, said, look, we're going to go this model, and that's what we did. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, so this is just the basic statistics on the plan, and then I promise I'll give it to Kelly. So really on the rights, the takeaway, what's going to end up happening is about 190 miles of roads are going to get sewered. We're going to sewer about 12,000 parcels. In the process of that, we'll need to install about another 90 pump stations as we go through this process. It'll take us 30 years. It is not a fast process for a number of reasons, not least of which is it just takes a long time to put in 190 miles of sewer. You know, if you think about normal planning average is maybe 100 feet a day on a good road without a lot of traffic, and then you get in like a 28 and it's a lot less than that on a per day basis, and you start figuring out, how, you know, for 190 miles at those rates, how many years it just takes time. In addition to all the coordination piece, in addition to I think people are finding now there's only so much disruption the community can tolerate. You know, I can't go through and do 10 projects all at once, basically with no detour routes and shutting everything down. There's got to be some understanding of, all right, if we take traffic from here, it's got to go here, and how does that work? So I can't have a project here and here at the same time. You know, those conversations happen. That Kelly lives this life. Those kinds of things happen all the time. So that's yet another reason on the timing piece why it's slow. Now, to the Lake Pocket folks, we're coming. You know, the east side of that, Vineyard Wind just came blowing up that east side of Finney's Lane. We're coming on that place right now. We're about to do the housing that comes off of that in this next phase. The west side of that's going to get done regardless of Park City Wind is my guess. So that's on the docket. It's coming along too. The north side, we haven't gotten on the docket yet. And that's the piece. But if you look at it from a nitrogen perspective, those weren't the areas driving the nitrogen conversation. There's certainly the area on the freshwater side, and as we talked about before, freshwater's got an issue too, and that's why we're having these conversations. Does that sort of help as you're going door to door and answering those questions?
Yeah, no, it was for a friend of mine. Actually, it wasn't me going door to door. I'm a Hyannis person. I've been sewered for a long time.
Fair
Thank you.
enough. I'm just trying to make sure we got what we need.
I just thought the opportunity was there, so I would ask.
Okay,
Thank you.
do you want to hit the non-traditional side, or do you want to jump onto it? Hit me one more slide, and then I'll let you go. The non-traditional area, we talked about it briefly. So we made a decision. So a lot of communities are struggling how to deal with non-traditionals. And what the struggle came down to was trying to get DEP to agree to credits up front. We said, we're going to do this differently. What we're going to do is we're going to build a plan in 3 phases based on traditional sewering that's going to achieve everything we need to achieve. I can achieve the TMDLs with the existing traditional plan. We then are going to do non-traditional work early, like within this phase. We will monitor that work, and if it proves out that we are actually removing as much nitrogen from that as we think we are, we're going to come back to you, DEP, and say, look, remember all that stuff in phase 3, that yellow, when you'll see it, it'll be yellow. Phase 3, it tends to be farther away, it tends to be more expensive to sewer. We'd like to be rid of some of that in turn for this. But now I have data to inform that argument versus just going in and saying, I think Mill Pond dredging is going to buy me this much nitrogen, do you agree? Which they were never going to do. So that's why we're going about it that way. But most of it right now is focused in the Three Bays area. A lot of that's because that phase 3 part that we'll talk about in a minute surrounds it. Starting at the top of the Mill River, you'll see the cranberry bogs up there. Barnstable Clean Water Coalition is doing a lot of good work up there in the cranberry bogs. They can start to act as a filter system if it's done correctly, and I think they're doing that, to bring that back. It then comes down the river to Mill Pond, which is at that sort of intersection of 149 there. That pond used to be 8, 9, 10 feet deep when it was first dug about 350 years ago as a mill pond. It's now about a foot deep. Most ponds traditionally remove about 50% of the nitrogen they encounter. This one's removing about 11%. So the theory is that if we can dredge Mill Pond and get the depth back and get the residence time back, that we can restore its ability to actually remove nitrogen. Then if we come further down to Warren's Cove at the head end by Prince Cove, talking to the aquaculture piece, if we go into there with aquaculture, and particularly as a grow out for young spat, not to, and then it moves further down to the bay to the commercial farms that are further down, you now have filtration at the top effectively, settling / treatment through Mill Pond, coming through filter feeders in Warren's Cove, and I'm really interested to see what comes out the bottom of that. And I want to go have that conversation with DEP once we have it all in place. So that's the non-traditional stuff. Other things that are happening, stormwater treatment, we're working stormwater issues routinely. MS4 program's doing that as well. Alternative septics are being discussed a lot, and I'm happy to talk to that ad nauseum if people want to go down that route, et cetera. So that's the non-traditional stuff. All right, now I will shut up and let Kelly do her thing. Oh, wait, sorry. Yes, ma'am. So that's what we're talking about at the top there, Barnstable Clean Water Coalition is doing. So they have cranberry bogs up there, and so wetlands are more effective at removing nitrogen than a cranberry bog as an agricultural feature. So the theory being that if we convert cranberry bogs back to a natural wetland, or in some cases a pond, there was also some discussion of doing sort of pseudo PRBs in them, they would remove more nitrogen. They're working that problem set right now and basically testing those theories out right now to find out what's sort of working for them and stuff like that. And they're doing really good work up there doing it. So that's what I mean by abandoned cranberry bogs.
So if that were to
Microphone.
turn out to turn out to be something that worked, the town would have to acquire various cranberry bogs.
We don't have to do anything. The town may elect to do that. They may say that there's value to them to do that for a number of reasons.
If there was value.
Sure.
Yeah.
But again, right now we can achieve the plan with the traditional system that's going in as it's currently shown. So nothing additional to that has to happen. I think everything from this point in time is a good conversation about what do we want to do? Are there better ways to do it? Has technology changed since this plan was written, et cetera? And that's why you'll notice the plan has an every 5-year touch point with DEP. We got to update the CWMP every 5 years. And it's principally to do that, to make sure adaptive management is coming into the conversation, to make sure that we're looking at, okay, what's changed, what's going on, et cetera. As an example, for us to date, when we first wrote this plan, the wind projects weren't anywhere on the screen. We had to shift things around to accommodate the wind projects when they came through. Not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I'm not here to advocate one way or the other, but that is something that changed. We now, at the 5-year point, will have to make sure DEP is aware that we've had to do that. Does that answer your question? Super. Yes, ma'am.
So where are we in phase 1, 0 to 10? Where are we?
So we're about year 2 right now. Pounding through Vineyard Wind, the project that just went, frankly, from Colville's Beach all the way up through Finney's Lane has just been completed for sewer. We've got a pump station we still have to get squared away. It's not ready for hookups until that's happening. That's waiting for utility, frankly, at this point. The electric utilities have just been slow to get to us. But that one's pretty much done. You'll notice we're on 28 heading east at this point. We're coming basically from the new pump station that's being built at the corner of Finney's and 28. You've probably seen the crane there. There's now piping that comes from that's coming all the way to the wastewater plant. That's the work that's going on in 28 now. When that is done, we're heading west. When that's done, we're heading west. We're trying to get out to 149 because that will get the backbone in. At the same time, we'll start branching off and starting to get some of the neighborhood projects like the Finney's Lane project on the east side of Lake Oquawket, et cetera, and start pulling that in as well. And additionally, we're working the plant issue, and that's what I'm doing.
And so the more users you get on the system, the less costly it's going to be for the users, right?
Well,
Does that help?
the user cost has been dictated already by town council in terms of what their assessment is going to be. That's already been set and dictated. The cost of actual day-to-day operation is the cost of actual day-to-day operation. That's there, and when people start coming on, they'll start assuming that. So I don't know if that speaks to your question or if I just missed it.
I got one question about alternative stuff. So in the very beginning of this presentation you did, when you were showing watersheds, you showed,
10 times fast.
yeah, the north side and the south side of Barnstable, significant differences with lots of high numbers on the south side, not so much on the north side. It occurred to me that Great Salt Marsh out there is probably doing one heck of a job of filtering the bad stuff through there. And so I was just wondering if there was ever a conversation about restoring some south side salt marshes for that natural benefit also.
So and this may be more, Lindsay, your bucket than mine from your background. There was some discussion about opening up inlets and increasing flushing to those south side embayments. The restoring those is going to require, it's sort of a Gregorian knot. Restoring those requires lowering nutrients, and if we want to restore them to lower nutrients, then we need to lower the nutrients to restore them, if you know what I'm saying. There's not enough flushing there, and this gets into the biology side of this, which, I'm an engineer, not a biologist, and unfortunately Brian's not with us, but he used to be able to speak to this well, the difference between sort of a salt marsh and an estuary and what each did and why each ecosystem handles nitrogen slightly differently and how that works. If you want to go further down that conversation, I need to go do some reading first.
No, I can do that personally. I don't need to do that for the whole body. I was just curious because, the Great Salt Marsh in the north side, your side, is famous for, has been for hundreds of years as far as its benefit to the community. So even for making salt.
Well, what's Brian from UMass's last name?
Brian House.
Brian House. When he presented to us to Barnstable Village about the report, he said the biggest factor in Barnstable is tide. It's three things: tide.
It's all flush.
Yeah. Another real quick question.
Yes,
when
ma'am.
is the 5-year update on the?
So we got delayed because of COVID for a year, so I think it's 3 years from now. I think we have we're starting talking about it now. It's 3 years we have to deliver it. And there's an annual update that goes every year to the Cape Cod Commission as well, and we write those annually. Okay, ready for Kelly? Oh, sorry, Susan.
Sorry, I have more questions. The nitrogen gas that you talked about, is that good for us? Is it
There's
okay
nitrogen
to
gas
just
in the atmosphere
release it
now.
into the air?
I mean, try not to be flip. Don't dive with it, because you can get the bends off it. But you're fine, and you're walking around. The atmosphere is comprised of nitrogen, oxygen, all that stuff now, and it's not a problem.
Okay. Second question is once the sewage treatment plant is updated, that it will be enough to it will be adequate to handle all of this new sewage that's coming in?
Yeah, the plant actually has capacity to handle a lot of it. In fact, almost all of it now. Just not to the treatment level we want it to be at.
Okay. And then what will happen to the effluent?
So let's come back to that, because that's going to be a whole nother discussion, which I'm happy to get into, but I want to get Kelly in here because at some point it's going to help to be able to have the whole components of this. Anything else before I put Kelly onto it. You want me to flick it and you sit over here?
Oh, this is the actual mouse.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had the clicker.
I think last time this worked. Yeah, perfect.
Good evening, Kelly Colby. As Rob mentioned, I am the communications manager for the Department of Public Works. I've been with the department, I've been with the town for almost a year now. And I bring that up because I did a presentation earlier this week for CFAC. And one of the questions that was asked was how much of your role in communications has been proactive versus reactive? And quite frankly, it's been about 50-50. When you think about how much work is going on the street, how much planning efforts are going into both the traditional and non-traditional solutions, and just the comprehensive wastewater management plan as a whole, there's so much to communicate. There is the aspect of traffic management and detours and disruption and access limitations from time to time when we're crossing roads that are dead ends, for example. Then there's also the communication side of, am I getting sewer? And when am I going to be eligible to hook up? What are the costs associated with that? And then there's sort of the third-party elements of when you have another contractor, such as a wind project on the street, and communicating sort of where the lines are, the boundaries are between what we're doing here in the town to support our wastewater management efforts versus other projects. So I like to say that a lot of the reactive part of my role has been garnering a wealth of feedback and information from our residents, whether that is full-time residents that live here year-round, second homeowners, building relationships with homeowners associations, condo associations, our local business owners, and taking all of that feedback to ultimately redesign what is the Barnstable Water Resources website. So if you haven't seen this site previously, it really was sort of a hodgepodge, and I say that with love, of information, because they just needed to get something up on these pages so that if anyone was searching for the information or a town councilor wanted to point a resident to some information, there was something readily available outside of just the Town of Barnstable website. So taking probably about the first 6 months of my role, all of the feedback, we ultimately set out to redesign the website and make it not only more user-friendly, but also really tell a story. So I won't spend a ton of time walking through all of the nuts and bolts, but I do want to show you sort of the approach that I've taken in redesigning the site and why we've done that. So the homepage really, as I said, tells the story. We start with why. Why are we doing this? We're doing this to protect how we live, work, and play here, in the town of Barnstable. You'll see, before we jump down, you'll see in this yellow box here what I call sort of our 5 most frequently asked questions or most asked about topics. The first is, am I eligible for new sewer service? That link will take you directly to the property lookup tool through the assessor's database, where folks can type in their address or a last name, pull up their parcel, and then see if they are slated, or I should say identified, for phase 1, 2, or 3 of our sewer expansion plan. From there, residents can then call me, and I can actually look into our GIS database to tell them if they're in phase 1, what of the 16 current projects they are identified as. We're actually working on a more user-friendly feature where we can actually take that self-service one step further and allow folks to look up their individual properties on a project level. So that more to come on that. But ultimately giving them at least that first step to say, am I getting sewer? Yes, I'm in phase 1, 2, or 3, and then from there being able to connect with me personally to give them more information. How do I hook up? Links directly over to the sewer connection page, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Same with anticipated costs, which breaks down what I've boiled down to really the 3 main costs that a property owner is going to be responsible for: the sewer assessment, connecting the building on their property to the sewer service stub left in the right of way at their property line, and then ultimately their utility billing. Road closures is exactly what you would expect. We have a Ways for Cities partnership, which allows us to actually update road closures and detours in real time. The one nuance there is it does feed to Apple and Google Maps, but Apple and Google also rely off of their own location-based services, so that sometimes can cause frustration if Apple's showing a road open that technically is closed. So we really have been working very closely with Director of Communications Lynn Poyant and her team to get the word and the message out to really leverage Waze as a source of truth in terms of roadwork updates. And then our FAQs. We have a very robust frequently asked questions portal that we break out into various categories, and we'll take a look at that in a moment as well. Moving down the page, we have what I call our splashy call to action. We actually have a separate water resources email list where folks can subscribe and they can get updates regarding CWMP implementation, water quality alerts, and a variety of other pertinent information. We have about 1,800 subscribers this year, to date, I should say, which has been up 40% from the year previous. So obviously the folks who are engaged are loving the content. They have high click-through rates. There's a lot of really cool data you can dive into if you like to nerd out on email marketing in our CWMP annual report, and I'll show you where to access that as well. We then walk through, again, preserving our quality of life, giving a map here to touch upon what Rob spoke about earlier, the 7 watersheds that we are proactively looking to heal, restore, protect through our CWMP implementation. And then we hit users front and center with the 30-year plan. So these maps are all clickable. You can click and expand it to make it larger. I won't take up too much time doing that, but this is essentially the CWMP, the 30-year plan. So you'll see, and again, kind of hard with the lighting here, it's a little washed out, but yellow, red, green being our phase 1, 2, 3, and then some of the other colors off to the side, which are our stages. We also have a latest news section, some great video content regarding the CWMP, and then we get into some of our most frequently asked questions. So some of these pages, we've pulled just sort of the top 5 FAQs and put them front and center for folks who are scrolling through the site. How will implementation be paid for is a great one that came up on the CFAC meeting this past Monday, where we made sure that we added that to our sort of top FAQs. A lot of folks are obviously calling, inquiring about the watershed permit regulations, and we are happy to report that on September 1st, we submitted our application for a watershed permit, and we did so with the request for a watershed permit to cover the entire town of Barnstable. So we continue to post updates on the FAQ page as our application is ongoing through the review process with Mass DEP. And then you'll also see a little call to action that we will have a homeowner sewer connection guide coming out this spring ahead of first connections. And this is really a deep dive into everything as a property owner you would need to know about the sewer connection process. And we'll look at the abridged version on our sewer connection page in just a moment. We'll just quickly look at some of the internal pages, and please feel free to stop and ask any questions as well. But essentially, the wastewater plan page is a lot of what Rob just covered for you. But again, in a little bit more conversational manner to help the average resident, not that that wasn't conversational, but to just help the average resident really understand, why do we need to do this? What is it comprised of? Again, 3 10-year phases. You can download the entirety of the CWMP if you wish. We show you again the overall 30-year staging map, talk a little bit more about how implementation for the plan will be paid for, specifically what Mark Milne's team has done and CFAC in terms of coming up with revenue streams to help support implementation. How will the remaining funding be met? So again, we don't have to go through this in too much detail, but to show you where you can point folks to for this information. And then a lot of the footers will again have latest news, read all news, all the resources. The phase 1 project page, I think, is probably most pertinent to most property owners right now if they know they're in part of phase 1, because we actually give a solid implementation update. We have the map currently here, which again is clickable to make it larger, where you can see the 16 identified projects that make up this first 10-year phase. So as Rob alluded to, we have the Strawberry Hill Road project, which is this yellow here, effectively from Colville's Beach, running up obviously part of Craigville Beach Road, Strawberry Hill Road, all the way up Finney's to Route 132. The sewer being completed on time and on budget for that project, and we anticipate first connections for a portion of that project route this coming spring. And then we also have in this sort of deeper blue-purple is the Route 28 East project that Rob also spoke of. Next on the docket really is going to be this light purple here with the Finney's Lane Neighborhoods Project. So effectively expanding upon the infrastructure that was installed as part of the Strawberry Hill Road project on Finney's Lane to allow us to then add sewer to those neighborhoods on the east and west side. And you can certainly go through all of these projects in more detail. But what I think a lot of folks really like to see is the actual anticipated, and I should say, adaptive planning schedule. So again, when a resident calls me and says, Kelly, I know I'm in phase 1, I can see it on my parcel on my parcel listing on the assessor's database, what project am I in? I can go into our GIS database, look up their actual parcel, their address, and tell them, for example, okay, well, you're part of, let's just say, Old Craigville Road. Right now, the Old Craigville Road project is in survey. We actually anticipate survey being completed by the end of this calendar year. We'll then move into design. I can walk them through a little bit of what that process is going to look like, talk about the public information meetings that we will host, and how we will begin to communicate with residents identified along that project route, and then give them the very realistic timeline of we're looking at construction starting in late 2026. Old Craigville Road is a very large project, sewering many neighborhoods surrounding Old Craigville Road, and it's looking like a 4-year construction project. And then I always reassure them that not 4 years in front of your property, but for the entirety of the project. And then I can leave them with knowing this schedule, knowing that it's adaptive. I'm comfortable telling you that sewer will likely be available sometime late 29, early 2030. Check back. Obviously, we'll continue to keep you updated. And then that's usually the place where I remind residents that before we even break ground, there is a whole slew of communications that will happen from the town, from mailers to door-to-door outreach to the public information sessions. So no one will be left in the dark. They'll be communicated very heavily and strategically to make sure that they also have a bit of conversation throughout the process as well. There's some forms they'll have the opportunity to fill out. We'll look at that on the sewer connection page. But essentially, this timeline allows me to give folks a little bit of reassurance about when they can estimate being able to connect to sewer, at least when we can estimate their project starting. And again, adaptive, able to sort of ebb and flow as conditions dictate. And down below, you can actually click into each individual project and get an update as to where we stand. When we look at the sewer connection page, this is really just sort of a quick hit at what are the 8 steps to connect to sewer. I'm a property owner. I own a residential home, on Shoot Flying Hill Road, for example. What's it going to take for me to connect to sewer? The first step really is completing that sewer connection form. So when I talked about pre-construction communication to residents, when we identify residents along a project route, we will start with a mailer that says, hey, resident, property owner, it's us, the town. We're getting ready to commence construction for the Shoot Flying Hill Neighborhoods project. Here's a sewer connection form we'd like you to fill out. Give us some more information about your property. Give us an amateur sketch. Where is your septic located? Do you know where your plumbing comes out of your home? Is there a shrub that you love that has been in your family for years that you don't want to disrupt when you connect? Are you planning an addition or have a deck? Give us a little bit of information about your property. We then take that information internally, in-house, and as we're working through the development and the design of the sewer project, we use that information and allow the property owner to opine on effectively where their sewer stub is going to be located. Now, it doesn't always work perfectly with a resident's request, but more often than not, we can take that information and locate the sewer service stub, which is again, installed in the right-of-way up to the property line in a place that's going to be most effective and efficient for that property owner to connect to sewer. So that's really the first communication, is filling out that sewer connection form that will now come directly from me as, on behalf of DPW. We'll also do door-to-door outreach, which we've done previously in the past. And then that will also be around the time where we start having those public information sessions. Then the town sewer construction happens. It can take anywhere from 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. You saw the schedule. Every project is slightly different. And then step 3 is, aside from attending public information sessions and completing your sewer connection form, step 3 is really where the property owner's responsibility comes into play. Board of Health will ultimately notify property owners when they are eligible to connect to sewer service. From there, the property owner is responsible for hiring a licensed sewer installer. There is a database available where folks can locate installers. We keep that database updated as often as we can and need to. The residential construction will actually happen. This is completing the connection from the building on the property to that sewer service stub left in the right of way. There's also an inspection process where ultimately a DPW inspector will sign off that the connection was done properly, it's completed, and that will generate a tie card that then signals to the water pollution control facility that they are ready to begin billing for sewer service. There's also the septic abandonment, which a lot of folks will ask about. That process typically can be handled by that licensed sewer installer. So that is also dictated by the Board of Health in terms of how the septic is abandoned, whether it's filled in place, if it's ripped out, there are variety. It'll be basically, that decision will be made on a property by property basis by the health department. But essentially that septic abandonment can be handled more often than not by that licensed sewer installer who's completing the connection. And then the actual utility billing, when everything's said and done, all the boxes are checked, the utility billing will begin on a quarterly basis based off of water usage. We're looking at an average bill of about $400 to $435 for sewer service. And we've been in conversations about meters that can be installed to help deduct for irrigation on properties as well. Down below, we have the list of contractors that folks, if they want an easy way to find a contractor, can go and download a database. We again break out what the anticipated costs are, remind folks that we're here if they need us, where they can go for more information, why, again, we need to do this, have, again, some more FAQs at the bottom, but then really what we're trying to do is then send them, using this little call to action box, over to our anticipated costs. And this is where we break down not just the sewer assessment ordinance, which is available to download and for folks to read, but also break down what I mentioned earlier being really those three main costs for the property owner. The sewer assessment, which Rob spoke of earlier, the connection, so actually connecting the building on your property to the sewer service stub left in the right of way. It's when you will hire a contractor to do that. Typically, as I noted earlier, the connection process also can include that septic abandonment and then your utility billing. And then down below, we have a variety of different financial resources that we know are available. Right now, this is sort of as we learn of more resources, we're adding them to the site. Most recently, we added the information about the tax relief bill. We have the Cape Cod Aqua Fund. Any program that we hear of that we know is authentic and that we can vet, we will add to the site. In my opinion, the more resources we can provide to residents, the better, rather than making them have to search for themselves. That essentially is the crux of what we're trying to really establish on the site is what's happening, why are we doing it, when is it happening, when does it affect me, and how much am I going to be responsible for? There are plenty of other internal pages you can take a look at, one being the water quality monitoring page, which right now is primarily focused on our freshwater, our ponds and lakes. We post all of our water quality reports here. We also have links to the APCC's cyanobacteria monitoring map. We break down everything you can need to know about a water quality alert, our water quality alert signage, giving people, again, sort of a firsthand look at what they could be seeing at their ponds and lakes. Links for more information. And we're actually talking about expanding this to also have a subsection where we include our embayment monitoring information as well. And then last, we'll just look at, and we won't go through this, but again, I mentioned a robust FAQ section. We have a couple of different topics here right now: sewer connection anticipated costs, the sewer assessment, a whole FAQ section, financing with a lot of help from Mark Millen and the CFAC group in terms of messaging that, and then understanding the why. We'll continue to add to this FAQs portal. And then lastly, reports and documents. This is where you'll be able to find our currently our two annual reports, the most recent being the 2023 annual report, which was recently submitted to the Cape Cod Commission. And you can also find all of the links to all the various documents, certificates, I should say, for the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan and related resources such as the sewer ordinance, the 208 plan. And then one question we get often is, every year as part of our CWMP annual report, we are required to submit water quality data to the Cape Cod Commission. recently we had some residents ask, well, where does that data go? What do they do with it? And they actually, Cape Cod Commission aggregates it into a very user-friendly water quality data portal. So we, again, make it really easy for residents to be able to find that information without having to go searching for it on their own. The site is a living, breathing site. It will evolve as the plan evolves. It'll evolve to include other innovative solutions as we work through those projects as well, and we're always open to feedback. I welcome feedback from committee members, from counselors, obviously our residents, but I am really proud of where we've taken the site, and I just think it's such a wealth of information, so I appreciate the opportunity to share it with you.
Well done. Questions, comments? Let's go with Lindsay first. Okay, we'll go around.
Rob, could you briefly explain how the CWMP is going to help folks with the new Title V regulations and how that?
Okay, so let's talk about the Title V regs. So what's happened is DEP has updated the Title V regs. In the process of doing that, when they were going through that, we had a number of conversations with them. And our principal message to them was, look, we had already at that point had a regulatorily approved CWMP. Don't get in our way. When 208 came out, it stopped everything for a while, and we said, do not repeat that. And I think they've honored that request. So what they have said is that our CWMP will count as the watershed management plan that they're counting, that we can submit on the entire town versus having to submit the CWMP independently for each independent watershed. And we have done that. In fact, what I was told by DEP recently is that we were the first community to submit for a watershed permit. So Kelly and her team, kudos to them, pulled this thing together lickety-split, said our CWMP is the basis as our watershed management plan. We want to stay on it. We want to stay on its timeline. And we want our watershed plan to reflect that. And that is the submission that went in. What that does for the community, though, is it relieves us of the everybody has to upgrade to Title V system requirement, which depending on where you're at with implementations, either from 5 to 7 year period, that you'd have all had to do that. By being on the watershed plan, with having a watershed permit, we will be relieved from that. Now, that means that the community is relieved from an exterior regulation saying you have to upgrade your Title Vs. That does not stop the community from making a decision about itself to say, maybe we don't want to let people put Title Vs back when they naturally age out or they naturally transfer property, all the stuff that we all went through that lived here, cesspools to Title V, those transition periods. Maybe as a community, we would want to make the decision that we're going to say, okay, when that happens, you'll go to whatever the next technology is, not a Title V again. But that doesn't stop us from doing that. What will stop is an exterior force saying you have to do this without thinking. The decision gets put back in our hands, and we as a community get to do that. So I've heard that cut both ways. I've heard people say, oh my goodness, you're never going to have to deal with Title Vs. This is terrible. Well, no, we still as a community can do that. And I've heard people also be completely terrified that they're going to have to update their Title V in the next 5 years. And no, the watershed permit will protect you from that. Does that answer your question, Lindsay?
Yes.
So, yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. Did you have more?
What I was just going to say was just to pick up on Kelly's talk real quickly, just to tie it in. We can go back to the phase plan if you want to go back to there to have questions and stuff. But one of the things we understood quickly in the process is that we're engineers, which means we don't communicate too good. So we went out and said we need to get the best people we can get to help us talk about the stuff we understand, which is, hey, water flows downhill, and inverse farming and stuff like that I can geek out on all day long, and help us talk to the community because it's ultimately their plan. And I think what you've seen here is the beginning of that effort. Kelly's only been here pretty much just a year. And this has already happened. We're still talking about what we're going to do in terms of other mechanisms of communication and how we're doing that. And just the amount of outreach she's done has been invaluable. So that's why we wanted to take a minute to sort of show this, to make sure people know this resource exists. Because a lot of the questions we get, you can answer, you can find here. It doesn't mean don't call us. We're certainly happy to talk to you. But a lot of the time you could get that here. So I just wanted to get that in real quick. Happy to take questions on either the plan or the communication plan or whatever else you want to talk about. And I am cognizant of time, so that's,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, that's your purview.
Did you ask already? No.
No, she wanted to.
Very
Okay.
quickly, two really excellent presentations. Thank you. And Kelly, I'm just so impressed. This website, I think, is terrific. Not that often that you go to a presentation about a website and you really do want to go home and look at it. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And there are a lot of other pages you can look at. We didn't even look at the news and updates. You can actually see, we'll just show you real quick because it's
here we
cool.
go. Now
You
you
can
open,
actually-
Susan, you open that box. I'm just saying.
It's like Pandora's box. Here we
We
go.
actually have the Waze live map embedded directly on the site. So right now, obviously, there's no construction. We're after hours, but you would see where Route 28 is that single direction of traffic that is closed. And we post updates pretty regularly here. And then we also have a whole blog section too. But this part I really love because you can expand this, you can put your address in, kind of get an idea of how do you navigate around detours if you'd like to. So there's certainly a lot more, and we welcome feedback because there's more to communicate as well as this project expands.
Rob, did you have a follow-up?
No, ma'am, I'm
No,
just
you're
passing
good?
the floor back
Okay.
to you.
Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
Beautiful. The website is gorgeous. The question that came to my mind is if you live in a area which is going to be potentially available to have sewer, and in whatever 3 to 5 years, and you sell your house and your current septic system fails, how's that being handled?
So right now, that policy, because that's basically a policy question, and it really resonates out of the Board of Health, because they have jurisdiction over the septic systems. That's being discussed now in addition to the connection policy. What they are currently doing is they're contacting us when someone contacts them and saying, okay, how far out are people? So if you're 2 years out, as an example, they're probably working with you. If you're 7 years out, you may have to deal with that. So that jurisdiction resides at Board of Health, and we work with them to keep them up to date on all of this so that they understand where it's coming and where it's not, and then they're working with constituents on that, while at the same time trying to craft more formal policy in terms of, so that's understood and known.
So it's a property-by-property basis, really?
At this point in time.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Fran?
I have a question specifically about Katuitt Harbor. There are several homes on Katuitt Harbor that still have cesspools. I don't expect to see the sewer in Katuitt in my lifetime. And so my concern is, while this is all going on and we're not going to be on the septic sewer system, the harbor's continuing to get polluted because...
Just scroll down, we can work on that. Okay, so let's talk Katuitt real quick. It's hard to see here. You might be able to see it on the monitor in front of you better. Notice Katuitt's got all that purple in it. We are coming to Katuitt. It's called the stages. The reason why it's not in phase 1, 2, or 3 is because at the time we were looking at Western solutions for dealing with that, i.e. JBCC or cooperative situation with Sandwich. I think at this point in time, we've pretty much exhausted those conversations, though they still go on to some extent. If I was a betting person, I would bet we're going to bring that back east to the plant. So I would bet that will happen in phase 2, would be my bet. Because it'll just take us that long to get out to you, to get down 28 and get down to Katuitt. So I just want to make sure that it's understood we are coming into Katuitt. We are going to deal with that. Initially, we weren't. We were going to trade away the nitrogen from Papaneset Bay, which is a little bit of the watershed that is in Katuitt. But we started hearing from constituents that lived on Shoestring Bay to say, look, you can do that, but Shoestring Bay is getting hammered. And that does nothing for us, even though it's regulatorily acceptable to do. And so that's why we brought this back into the plan and then started to try to find out the destination of it and start to work that issue. So that's that. Now, the cesspool piece, again, DPW doesn't have jurisdiction on private on-site systems. We have jurisdiction over the larger systems that are going to try to deal with the nutrient issues writ large. We have to work with the Board of Health on that, and I don't know what the Board of Health's regulations off the top of my head are regarding cesspools.
Thank you.
Cheryl?
Yes, hi, good evening. Just to expand on what Avery was saying and asking about if somebody's septic fails, and I believe the answer was if it's like 7, 10 years out or something, I probably can't help you. But if it's like 2 years out, maybe they can work with you. In what ways could they work with you? Because if it's failed, it's failed.
So I think some of that comes down to the mechanism of failure. So is it failed because an inspector says that it's above that line and such, or is it failed because it's literally bubbling out of your yard and causing a problem? Lots of times, at least on the south side of the Cape, that's because of the sandy soils, you don't see that. When I was in Maine and New Hampshire, I would see that more often because you're in heavy clayey soils, and it would literally come bubbling out of the yard. At that point, it's failed. There can certainly be discussions about tight tanks and things of that nature, but again, I don't want to speak for the Board of Health or the Health Department because I don't hold jurisdiction in those areas.
Okay, so I think like you did answer it, though. If it's an inspector that says it's getting, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on failure mechanism, but again, that's a conversation you should have with them.
Mandy, you all set? You have a question?
I have a potentially super basic question. The parts that I'm looking particularly in Marston's Mills that are white, like, does that mean that there's no sewer ever coming there? And
Nope. So what that means is in this plan, we didn't need to, if you remember those sub-watersheds and where the numbers were in the sub-watersheds, those white areas that are sort of between, we call it sort of the middle there, those white areas, we didn't need to deal with those areas because of nutrients or otherwise.
Okay.
Now, I'm fully cognizant of what other communities have done, and what we are going to do and what we've instructed the consultant is that when we put the pipe down 28, it's going to be big enough to bring those in someday. It's not planned to bring those in someday, but what I don't want to do is be, I won't be here, but Kelly sitting here in 25 years in town council saying, look, we really want to sewer these areas, and Kelly saying, sorry guys, we didn't put a big enough pipe in, we got to dig it all back up again. So we're going to put a pipe in that's large enough so that if those two areas decide, for whatever reason the town may decide it, to bring them in, they can. We, and the plan is not dictating that as part of the nutrient piece.
so in terms of the Title V upgrades, though, are those areas still covered by?
They are covered.
Okay.
So what we have been told is that the watershed permit will cover the town, and thus everybody in the town, regardless if you're on sewer or not, are covered by that Title V waiver. Again, that does not stop the town from making independent decisions about itself. That it can do. But at least from an external, because I don't want you coming back and say, hey, Rob, you said it was covered. Well, yeah, the town made an independent decision, not us.
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of time in downtown Hyannis, even though I don't live there. And I worry, believe it or not, about the state of the wastewater infrastructure in downtown Hyannis. Do you have some lifespan projection for that system?
Well, I mean, I guess from our perspective, the lifespan is infinity because we're not going to let it fail. We will continue to work our way through it. We're working on 720 Main Street now, which is the pump station at what end is that? East end? West end? West end? At the west end, which is going to facilitate a lot of rerouting of piping on South Street, which will facilitate life in the South Street piping. And there's a whole bunch of ancillary benefits that are coming with that project. Andy's going through, what is it? You just did a public release on this. Andy's going through to do a
Routine
bunch of TV cameraing and routine maintenance on Hyannis Main Street next week, right?
Yep.
Next week. And that's just him and his team continuing to look at those sewers and making sure they're in good shape. And if not, get it in the docket to fix it. So not meaning to be flippant, but realistically, we are not going to let that fail and stuff. So we will continue to look at it. We will continue to evaluate it periodically. And when it needs infrastructure improvement, we will do so.
I have one additional question. We know, and it's on your site on what the costs are expected to be. So everyone kind of figuring out how they're going to do that, and there's different ways that are proposed. But this is also a 30-year project, and the cost of things, I mean, right now the cost of things are high, but, is that fixed, or is that, well, we're 10 years out, we have to add on to that, and it's going to be more expensive? In other words, the people in phase one, and this is the
That's
cost.
town
What about-
council, I would think.
Yeah, so it's these three buckets. The left one is controlled by town council, And until town council changes his mind, it's fixed. Now, that doesn't mean it can't change its mind at any point in time. The sewer connection is probably going to be whatever inflation is at the time, so maybe this year it's more expensive to do a sewer connection, to your point. Maybe 3 years from now, the economy slows down and it's less expensive to do a sewer connection, or higher, but sewer connections they're going to be floating. The utility bill probably has some sort of increase built onto it, but much more reasonable, not necessarily tied to the inflation factor. Does that sort of answer your question?
Mandy, you had another one?
Yeah, back to downtown Hyannis, because I also spend quite a bit of time here as well. And this is also potentially a super basic, ignorant question, but there's a really big problem when there's storms and the water kind of rushing up out of the sewer grates, and so where?
Okay, so let's separate storm
Right,
drain
this is
system
where
and
this is
sewer
where
system.
yes.
So sewer system collects effluent and takes that away.
Right.
There's also a storm drain system with catch basins, which is meant to take rainwater away. It's a safety feature for the roads. There have been communities, we are not one of them, that have what's called a combined sewer system, where their storm drain actually connects into their sewer system and can cause their sewer system to overflow. We don't have that.
Thank
So
God.
what you're looking at is basically a storm, and if it's the one that happened this summer, that is a 100-year storm or more. That system's designed for a 25-year storm, but a 25-year storm in whenever the year it was designed. As we know, climate is changing, things are changing, et cetera. So those systems at some point can be exceeded. That's what happened there. That's why the intersection of Old Stage flooded out. That's why all that stuff happened. Because the rainwater came at such an intensity for such a period of time that it was just more than that system is designed to be able to ultimately handle at peak flow. Does that make sense?
It does.
And the question that then naturally follows is, well, why don't you put in one big enough? And that gets down to sort of risk reward, because if you put in a pipe big enough to account for any drop of rain that ever falls at any point in time, that's an awful expensive project. If that only happens once every 100 years, is that something you do?
Yeah.
Or do you protect against once every 25 years? Those conversations get into the policy side of it.
Yeah, I mean, because it happens quite a bit. It's not just that one big storm.
Understood.
So I'm just, thinking in terms of the infrastructure, because that's also a contamination issue
Yep.
as well.
And so there's a whole different team that's working stormwater issues and stuff, but I want to make sure people are clear that what you're looking at is not sewage,
Yeah.
that's stormwater, because we're not connected.
Excellent.
All right.
You
I
done?
I know I'm short on time. Yes, ma'am.
No, go ahead.
I never got back to your effluent question, Susan. I can do that some other time if you'd like to, because that can be 20 minutes just into and of itself. I don't know where you're on your agenda, Madam Chair, so I'm going to leave that to you, whether you want me to keep going or whether you want to stop.
Well, why don't we get the conclusion to whatever her question was, and we might as well just do that now, because I think this is the only time you're on the agenda officially until we finish land use and infrastructure.
Okay.
Okay.
And again, as I said before, happy to come back. At any point in time you feel it'd be beneficial to the planning, just let me know and I'm happy to come back. So your question on effluent. So the plant currently is capable, or will soon be capable, of handling any amount of flow we put to it. The problem the plant has right now is on the effluent side in terms of disposal of flow. The problem is not getting it into the ground, and it's really not even a nutrient situation. It's that if we put so much of it in the ground, it causes groundwater mounding downstream. So it changes the groundwater level significantly downstream. We are actively working that issue right now and looking at it a couple different ways. What we've already proven by modeling through the first phase of our work is that I can manage that mound with wells downstream. So at 9 points that town owns already, I can install irrigation wells effectively. So they're not drinking water wells necessarily, and can pull groundwater out and can manage the mound. It's really a control volume. I just got to pull out as much as I'm putting in to some extent above 2 MGD. The conversation that's starting to ripple around on that is, okay, I pull that out of the ground downstream. What is it and what do I do with it? You can throw it away. You can take it to a stormwater outfall, but you're effectively throwing a resource away at that point. It's groundwater. That then leads to another really interesting conversation. So the plant currently, as it's designed, is going to be a 4-stage Barnstable, which is an enhanced biological process. Just leave it at that. followed by membrane bioreactors, which are enhanced ultrafiltration systems, which take out everything down to almost viruses and even some of the viruses. That's currently what's going to be going in. If we get driven either by PFAS or by water need or by something else, there's another option. If on the back side of that, we put an RO system, reverse osmosis system, which is yet another but even higher ultrafiltration system. That'll do a couple things for us. One, it removes 90 to 98% of the PFAS that comes through the plant. And if we end up getting regulated for PFAS, we may get pushed there anyways. Two, it effectively builds a plant, which if you look at California and other places that are starting to look at direct potable reuse, that's the technology we're talking about. It will be a state-of-the-art technology. And frankly, what I have been told is to then take that effluent and put it in the ground, you will contaminate the effluent with groundwater. Because when you come out the backside of an RO, you effectively have distilled water. So at that point, do we even put it in the ground in the first place? Or do we start getting a broader discussion about water resources and utilizing water resources in a more effective way? And I'm not here to say this is what you have to do. I'm saying this is an option the community will have and they can make a decision about. We can certainly put it in the ground, go downstream, pump it out of the ground, throw it away, do whatever we want to do with it. But if by PFAS or otherwise we're driven to that last treatment train, and we can now utilize that water more directly, and at the same time it solves some of the redundancy problems I have in the water system. Again, I have plenty of water now, but it's a redundancy issue. Is that something that's worth having a conversation about? Particularly if it would be a lot less expensive than some of those other things. So that's where effluent is right now. That's what we're working on now. The phase of the work is we are now starting to engage with DEP. Their minds have been blown. And now we're starting to have the conversation about, okay, well, because the East Coast hasn't had to deal with this. If you go to California, if you go to Arizona, if you go to New Mexico, heck, if you go to Florida, they're having to have this conversation because they just don't have enough. This conversation is happening here, and the consultant we have engaged has offices out there that are dealing with it out there, and we're bringing them here to have the conversations with DEP here to say, these are options that are available to the community potentially, technically. Are you willing to go there regulatorily? And that's the conversation we're having. If they're willing to go there regulatorily, and I think ultimately based on the conversations we can get them there, then we'll come back to the community and say, here are your options. You could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. Here's the pros and cons of each one. How do we want to pursue this? But from a wastewater geek perspective, and I'll fully own the fact that I am one, the opportunity to at least think this way and to really look at water as a resource and realize that the waste we add to water, we can take right away from water just as easily as we add it to it. It doesn't change H2O. It doesn't change its chemical components. It's still H2O. We just got to pull everything off it. And once I've done that, you're back to H2O. What do we do with that? I think there's a really intriguing conversation that's coming for the community. It's not here yet. We're not done. We're not ready yet. But just to sort of tease that. But that's on the effluent side. At this point, we've established we can control the mound. Now we just got to figure out what we're going to do with the mound, even if we pull it out from downstream. Does that sort of get to your question point? Is everybody's jaws now on the floor and like, oh,
No,
my.
they're great. I'm geeking out on this too. So I learned more about wastewater than I ever cared to my entire life.
I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
No, this is great. No, Mark
That's a
Ells.
compliment
Mark
from
Ells
her.
was my first teacher. But are you saying that we have a good or enough supply of water into the future? Are you guys assessing future water supply needs?
So we have enough. We certainly can serve our current needs. We haven't had a need to put anything on the system in terms of water restrictions and things of that nature. We are putting in a new well next year, or basically moving Mary Dunn 4, which initially was under the influence of a pond. Now we're moving it so it's not. So that comes online with another 750,000 gallons a day next spring. 2 years from now, the Straightway plant will come online, and that will take Straightway 2, which is currently under the influence of 1,4-dioxane and ferric, and will remove that, and that brings another 1.4 MGD into the system. So we're not concerned about current needs. The problem we have is that I apologize for tone on this because I'm a wastewater guy. The water regulators do redundancy in a way that I find daft because we don't do it that way. The way wastewater does redundancy to a wastewater plant is if I need 2 pumps, I put a third one next to it, and then I know I can cover down. If I need 2 clarifiers, I might have a third one so I know I can cover down. The way the water regulators look at it is take your biggest source, including plant, and pretend like an atom bomb hits it and it's no longer there, and replicate that somewhere. And if you think about it, you start to get a self-licking ice cream cone, because now I make another big one to cover this big one, but now I got to deal with the fact that this big one could be taken off the map, and then what I have to do for this big one. So there's the water today issue that, do I have enough water today? We're very comfortable. We're working our way through that. Town council's been very proactive in terms of approving projects to make sure we stay ahead of that curve, and we are doing so. Then there's this redundancy conversation about how we comply with redundancy if all of a sudden now Mahar's on site, online, and now is our biggest source, a meteor hits it, and it just atomizes and goes away, and there's no value from it whatsoever. And then how do you cover down on that? And that's what we're looking at. That's why we're looking out in West Barnstable. That's why we're looking at those sorts of things. But that's also why when you start talking about reuse potentially on effluent, if that stops us from having to go out to West Barnstable, pull water out of the ground, treat it for PFAS because there is there, and then bring it all the way back to Hyannis versus I've already got it treated, I'm already sitting here, I just got to go a mile across town, and I'm done. That's the conversation the town is going to have. Doesn't have to have it. It can choose to not have it. But that's the conversation the town can have and the opportunities it's going to have at its disposal. Does that answer your question, Wendy?
It does. It does. And in West Barnstable, there's the concern if you pump the water out, and we're all on wells, how does that affect our household water supply in West Barnstable? But I sit on the Barnstable Housing Affordable Trust, whatever the hell it is. What is it? Barnstable
That's what it
Affordable
is.
Housing and Economic Growth Trust. And one of the project proponents that came to us recently, in an offhanded comment, made an observation about how much water people are using now in homes. And he's trying to assess rent, and all-inclusive. He said they're using so much more water. And it's like, I just found that very interesting. And how does that bode for future?
So I would
housing
ask this
opportunities?
question. Is it water in homes or water at the meter? Because what we're finding is a lot of our highest demand time is at pre-dawn and dawn, when all those irrigation systems come on. In fact, if we had a water shortage, the first thing that would happen is Dan would walk in here and say, hey, town council, I need a water ban on irrigation. Because I can knock that demand down significantly right off the bat. So to your point, we've seen, 'cause I was just having a conversation with Hans about it today, it's just like, wow, there's that much, significant percentages of it happen there from that irrigation system piece. So I'm curious, I know from the wastewater side, we always sort of assume, 70 gallons per person per day, 2 point something people per home, yada, yada, yada. But I'm curious to know if his perspective is at the meter, or they're literally understanding what human usage is in the house, and where is that coming from? Because showers are now lower flow, toilets are now lower flow, washers and dryers are now lower flow. I mean, I can't imagine cooking's taking any more water than it used to. I mean, where is that going? I got to think it's on the irrigation, the lawns,
Like tankless water heaters?
But we have water heaters before.
Long hot showers?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hey, look, I can tell you if it's my teenager, then it probably is the shower thing.
Maybe he's just feeding you a bill of goods.
No, I just found it interesting.
No, it's an interesting point. What else can we answer for you?
I think we're good. I will say that I have seen a lot of articles on a national basis. I know New York Times was doing stuff about how much water is being pumped nationally across the country out of water in certain areas. So that must be the whole West Colorado River thing that's going on. But they're looking at like places like Maryland, et cetera, et cetera. So you know it's in the back of everybody's head. So at some
We
point
can
in time, it will be
technologically
addressed.
do it.
Yeah.
We can. I mean, just as an engineer, we can technologically close that loop. Whether we want to, Whether we like that, that's a big question the community can answer. But technologically, we can recycle on a level that, the space station does it now. When I was in the Navy, we'd take an RO unit, you'd sit there and you throw it in a swamp that's putrid, and you can bring drinking water out of it. So, it's technically possible.
Good to know.
Socially, do we want to do that? That's the question. Anyways.
We'll find out.
Hey,
Thank you very much.
We very much appreciate your time. As we said, we'd be happy to come back if any point in time. I think we do have a piece in all those buckets. And with that, thank you for your time. Good night.
Thank you. Nicely done. Kelly, don't go anywhere. I don't mean tonight. I just meant in general.
In 30 years.
Good work. Yeah. Okay. So, update is on our LCPC membership. I don't recall that you did. I didn't even hear it. Hi, Jim.
Good evening, everyone. Jim Kupfer, Planning and Development. So, as you may recall, as you may know, we have a few folks that are not joining us for Phase 2. And with that, we had a robust discussion at the end of Phase 1 with our leadership here on the committee, as well as the Appointments Committee, to discuss adding some new membership. So, as everyone here is aware, we have been putting out notice to improve membership and seek new applicants. We've been putting out the membership requests in all the ways that we did for Phase 1, as well as some additional methods through social media and as recently as in the backpacks of all the kids at the public schools. So I do know at the end of today, I believe we had 12 applicants submit. So that is excellent, and we hope to have them on board here soon. I know we put out an invite, and I see a lot of members here from the public who put in an application, so that's great to get them up to speed. And but I know Rob will go to anyone's house and talk about wastewater if they would like to as well. So that's with the membership. We hope to have something, we hope to have new members soon. If you have any questions about the process or next steps, I'm happy to answer any.
I have a question, actually, Jim. When we all applied before, not everyone who had applied and been interviewed actually managed to be honored with coming on to the LCPC. But I believe that they were given letters that said they would be on the advisory, and that, I can't remember the exact wording, but obviously there'd be some people leaving at times, and it would be from that they would take some of or consider some of the replacements. Have we made sure that at least that we've contacted those people that are on the advisory that were interested before?
Yeah, so everyone that was designated to the advisory committee received the notice through our emailer that went out to not just the advisory members, but anyone who's really been actively participating in that Phase 1. We got a lot of great contacts through our Phase 1 outreach, so they were all directly sent emails and notifications about this process.
Thank you for clarifying. I was just in the interest of fairness. Thanks.
Okay. I do want to say also in the crowd tonight, we have a few candidates of people who are running for town council. We also have some existing town councilors with us tonight, and we do have somebody from the advisory group in the audience tonight that I could see, as well as staff and other people from the public. So thank you for coming. This is time for public comment. Anybody has any comment at all about Phase 2, Phase 1, membership, the plan? Please come. We've seen you before, and thank you for your input.
She's our hero.
Yes, she is. Yeah. Is the mic on, hon? Push the button, okay?
Okay,
Is
I
it
think it's
green?
on now, yes. Thank you very much. So anyway, thank you very much for all of your work on this committee. And the presentation tonight, I found it to be very interesting. So thank you to the staff who did that. My name is Catherine Ledeck. I live in the village of Barnstable. I have 2 process questions. The first is, how will the work of the consultants, the staff, and this committee work with and seek input from other commissions and boards who may have topic-specific expertise that would be highly valuable? I'm thinking about the Conservation Committee, the Historic Commission, and many others that could offer important input. I'd be interested in hearing from you or from the staff as to how that would happen. Would you like me to go to the second question?
Sure.
Okay. So the second question is that you may find that certain groups of residents and businesses or whatever, for whatever reason, have not participated in providing input to the new version of the comprehensive plan in its draft form. I suggest that when community input and outreach activities begin, that there be follow-up actions to engage with those parts of the community where their input would be very, very important, but has not yet been expressed. Remember, the comprehensive plan is the community's plan, so it's really important that all aspects of the community be included in providing their input to whatever it is that's being discussed. So I would ask that you consider hosting and targeting focus groups and/or community-based charrettes if you find that certain aspects of the community are, for whatever reason, not able to participate in the process. We did this in Fairfax County where I used to live. It was a great opportunity in a very informal and very welcoming way to include members of the community that just couldn't attend the meetings for whatever reason, couldn't provide input. So that's just my suggestion to you. I look forward to hearing about the answer to the first question. Thanks.
Okay, it would be interesting if you could write up an outline or just a summary of what you did in Fairfax for focus groups, because if people can't come to meetings like this, be interesting to know what time frame they used to participate in focus groups of charrettes or whatever you had, and what,
Sure.
you know, how you achieved the goal.
Of inclusivity.
Yes.
Right. Happy to do that.
Which is one of the reasons we are looking to diversify the people sitting on this board right now, this committee at this time, is to represent those that may not have participated in the past. But that doesn't answer your question. Okay, so for the first question, you're looking at subject matter experts that may exist in other parts of town. Does anybody, Jim's kind of in charge of the process here.
Oh, that's
Thank you for your question.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Excellent questions and comments. In terms of the first question, how we'll be incorporating expertise throughout our community. As Kate mentioned briefly in the beginning, in our workflow process, our suggested process includes much of what we saw this evening, starting off each topic with our experts in the field, both in the community, so staff, boards and committees, but also in the region. We have a lot of great nonprofits, the Clean Water Coalition being one of them, and many others that we seek to get actively involved in each of these meetings, and in the process of reviewing our chapters, our goals, our strategies, and hopefully them providing some good guidance to this committee so that we can make the best plan possible for our community, as was mentioned. In terms of outreach to the people, that's exactly what I hope we can achieve again in phase 2. I think we did do a fairly good job in phase 1 and going to the people as opposed to them coming to us here. Obviously, a once a night monthly meeting is not as accessible for everyone. So I think going out to the people, to the various villages, to the various activity locations, as we did in phase 1, is expected. we expect to do that, and obviously as the committee members, it was great to see all that active involvement, and hopefully we can continue that for phase 2 as well. But I'm certainly always interested in getting new examples into the mix. So as Kate mentioned, this is an evolving process. It hurt a little bit to write April 2025 as the end, and that doesn't have to be the end. You know, as we learned in phase 1.
Some point in time, it's got to end.
Some point in time. But I really like doing this, guys. So let's keep it going. As we learned in phase 1, you know, we had a clear 1-year timeline, but we continued to get a lot of good feedback, and a lot of good invites from various stakeholders in the community. So we continue to go on so that we can get the most robust phase 1 we could. So hopefully we can do that for phase 2 as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the public participated through the survey. And so if there are opportunities while we're doing drafts or at the end of a draft to create surveys, particularly from questions that maybe might come up from this group, and send it out to the public that way, then people, if they're up at 2 in the morning or they work all night and they sleep all day or whatever, they can find their own time to respond to us, which might be nice. Ms. Betty.
There it is. Betty Ludke, and I agree that was an amazing presentation. I've seen certainly lots of presentations on the Comprehensive Waste Management System plan, but that was probably the best one I've seen. It really tied in a lot of things. And as I was listening, I thought about, you know, your phase 1 and the inputs from people. Oh, and before I forget, Kathy, I hope you've put your application in. Fantastic. Okay. When we came in with the phase 1 piece, water rose to the top, if you will. Everyone was so concerned about water. We heard questions about Lake Quaquet. We certainly looked at the plan, and we can't get everywhere immediately. And what I loved about what Rob said is he talked about the focus on the innovative and alternative systems, and how maybe you look at that and you work with DEP to say, some of this stuff worked. You know, maybe that is going to, you know, catapult us ahead, where maybe, you know, we'll do things like this that'll help us. And certainly the cranberry bog or the removal of the cranberry bogs, restoration of the marshes and things. And then I think about Kathy's question about subject matter experts. And I thought an interesting group maybe to bring in would be the Green Center in Falmouth. They're doing a lot of innovative stuff. And I know we mentioned what the county is doing with their innovative alternative systems. But I thought it'd be something really interesting for this group to look at in more detail. Are those innovative and alternative systems? Because as Amanda recognized over in Marston's Mills, and I know in my precinct, most of our are going to be on the sewer. So it would be nice to bring more options into this plan and maybe celebrate that a little bit more. So that's would be my addition, is to pick up on what Rob said, and maybe through this planning process to really embrace that and rise it up to work with those systems. And he mentioned he was a previous fan of urine diversion, and that's a lot of what the Green Center talks about. So there's some pretty cool things. And then, you know, we talked about we're going to drink our effluent, that, you know, that's kind of different too. So a lot of stuff, but I think this is so key, again, based on the phase 1 stuff with the preeminence of water, that so many opportunities with this, and not to mention that this is taking the preponderance of our budget for the next 30 years. So if we're putting so much into this, we should look at every opportunity to perhaps lessen that, because it really does impact our ability as a town. Thank you.
Good feedback. Thank you.
Madam?
Yeah, clearly between land use and housing and natural resources, facilities and infrastructure, there has to be a place to widen the circle a little bit and include some more of those experts, as you suggested. Thank you.
Madam
yes,
Chair,
Sue.
I know I'm not a member of the public right at the moment, but I was unfortunately had to be a little bit late, and I missed the initial discussion about the phase 2 introduction and overview. And I just wanted to make a comment that as I had looked at this stuff last night, I did not see anything that seemed to encompass either helping those in need or building community, which to me were things that came through in the surveys and in people's coming to meetings that I had not seen before in this kind of situation. And I want to make sure that we address those. And so I just wondered how that was going to fit in.
Yeah, we need
with
to
these
have a conversation perhaps at the next meeting about the fact that this really is a comprehensive land use plan with sub-chapters on it. And so when you're talking about helping people, we have to decide what that is. Does that mean all of the social services that we're talking about, or are we talking about helping people have equal access to what this plan allows to happen in the town from a land use and planning perspective? I don't know if I worded that correctly, but a good point on that, because this will never be a human service plan. I just want to, not that I have a closed mind to that, I don't, but this is the wrong place for that, okay? So, but that doesn't mean that, I think as Catherine was talking, she's talking about groups being included, so that will address some of what your observation is. But you're right, we heard it loud and clear from some committee members as well as others, but
Yeah.
I think some people confuse the actual purpose of this plan, which is land use in basic English. I
But
don't
as
wanna-
a comprehensive plan, if there is something that has come forward that a lot
Yes.
of people are concerned about, we can, in the plan, not try to solve that problem, but to say,
To
here's
note.
part of the planning we need to work on is this.
Yes, and we could also refer it elsewhere within the town,
Yeah.
that it needs to be addressed. Mr. Schulte, did you have something you wanted to say, since I guess we're still in public comment?
Just briefly,
Your mic's not on.
Green button.
Bob Schulte from Centerville. As to Ms. Pell's comment, I just wanted to, I'm a LCP advisory member and have been since the beginning. I've gone to a number of the meetings. I honestly don't recall receiving any email asking if I was interested in participating. I'm not sure that I would at this point or not, but I checked with someone else that's also an advisory member. They said they didn't receive an email. Again, I could be wrong, maybe I missed it, but I would just ask that perhaps Jim and Elizabeth double check that, because I know at least 2 or 3 other LCP advisory members said they do not recall receiving any email asking if they would be interested in joining.
Okay, thank you for that input.
And Felicia,
So noted.
just further on to Sue's comment, in our vision statement, we did talk about the human situation as well. Being inclusive.
Being
yeah,
inclusive community is,
Yeah.
yeah, which leads to how we relate to that, but it's all based on the land use and the zoning versus the actual services that they receive. I'm just wanting to clarify. Maybe I'm not saying that appropriately. No? Does somebody want to clarify?
There we go. Yes, and there was a lot of discussion in phase one about human services and those services that could be provided. I think where, if my recollection serves right, the human services discussion ended with the thought of in each controlling issue that we think about inclusion and those services and how each issue item could be better to make sure that us as a community are serving our full population. So things like transportation, that we're not just thinking about how we're getting cars through our community, but how are we getting all modes of transportation? How are we getting our employees to and from their employment? And those could be those with, without a car, and how those folks get to places. How does our water quality serve everyone throughout, and not just in high-end areas, but in environmental justice areas as well, making sure that we're providing good air quality through our programs, such as our tree plantings that we're looking to do, and again, environmental justice areas and others. So looking at human services through a land use lens, I think, is was the idea, and that finding its way through the plan in each topic area. Very similar to, I think, what we talked about for climate resiliency, and that perhaps not being a standalone chapter, but that being riddled throughout each and every topic area because it touches each and every topic area.
And I would also ask that we, in that same vein, include how we would address people's desire to be more connected to their community and their neighborhoods. And that certainly can have something to do with land use and, how villages are built out and that kind of stuff. I think that
Human connectivity,
I just think
good
it's
point.
important for us to address that, and also to kind of, in some way, pass that on to, as you said, to somebody else to work on that in a very specific way.
Okay. All right. Any other public comment? Nada? Seeing none, we're going to move on to next meeting. So there was discussion on meeting schedule and next steps. Do you want to lead us through that?
Yeah, if I could. So first off, I think in discussion with leadership of this committee, the goal is to have some repetition for phase 2 and potentially identifying a specific evening each month to meet. And so that, and looking at our calendars and looking at the available space here, we identified the fourth Thursday, which was actually typically our meeting date for phase 1. We would like to offer that. I could put that out as a poll to everyone to see if that is a standing night that is available to everyone. But identifying that fourth Thursday and the backup, and sometimes maybe a secondary meeting with, as you see in phase 2, we have quite a bit of work to do. So unfortunately, we might have to be doing this twice a month sometimes if we want to keep going. The second Thursday evening of the month seem to be available most months. So I could put that out for everyone in the calendar to see if that can work for the majority of the committee. In terms of next steps immediately and next month, I know we start getting into the holiday season, but I think we have a great, just as we had for our first session, discussing the CWMP and how it kind of is the baseline for everything we're going to talk about here in terms of water quality and how that rose up to the top. We have a mapping exercise that we would like to invite Horsley Witten to come in and discuss land use into the future. That's really going to be kind of these two parties, the CWMP in terms of water quality, and then our land use mapping is really going to kind of set the tone for phase 2. And we would like to put that on November 30th potentially, if that is available for all parties here. Again, if we are able to.
So that would be the fifth Thursday
Exactly.
in November, because the fourth Thursday, as we all know, is Thanksgiving, so.
We could meet here on Thanksgiving too, if
No, I
everybody
don't think so.
No, okay.
You could be here at Thanksgiving, but,
That might be a lonely experience.
well, look at all you could get done.
Yeah, exactly. So if November 30th works for all, we can go ahead and reserve our consultant for that night.
Consensus? Consensus on November 30th? We got heads nodding?
Yeah, I'm all right with it.
Great.
Jim, can I
Okay.
ask you a question? You suggested that maybe more than once a month because of the amount of work to do. What about alternating it? I mean, I'm fine with twice a month, but some people can't do that. What about alternating it 1 month, 2 times that month, and then one time, and then 2 times and 1 time? That is as a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be up to the committee and the workload as we progress. I think, as we mentioned, we want to end sometime, and April 2025 is where we laid that end date. However, that with the assumption that we're moving right along on these topics, and some of these are weightier topics than others, and may take several meetings to get through the topic items, the questions. We might want to have a follow-up expert in. So with that, I think just having some flexibility in that process, and then with that, reserving those dates just in the committee's mind, but also reserving this room so that we have this space available. So if the second and fourth Thursdays, again, I'll put it out on a poll, but if the second and fourth Thursdays mostly work for all, I think that would be our target if we get a positive response.
Absolutely.
I'm fine with that.
There's an awful lot of information to get through, so whoever shows.
So
That's
does
my
that
theory.
mean we're scheduling one before the 30th, or are we just
No.
just going to go with the 30th? Okay, I just want clarification on that.
All right, anything else anybody wants to bring up? I have nothing else to add to the meeting. Okay, so let's see, our next meeting is November 30th. We'll do the minutes at that time, and then the agenda as usual. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you. Thank you all for tonight.